off as the last of our attendees walk up here. So my notes are on my phone. I'm bringing Bacon's Castle into the 21st century here, right? But tonight, I'd like to say welcome to Allen's Brick House. We will refer to this as Bacon's Castle after the talk again, but for now it's Allen's Brick House, right, until we get through the program. This is Virginia's oldest house, and North America's oldest brick house. So this is indeed hallowed ground for many reasons that you're sitting at here today. I'm Will Glasgow. I'm the CEO of Preservation Virginia. This is one of 6 historic sites that we care for and steward across the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're currently in the middle of a $2 million restoration campaign for this house. There are more than 60 windows on this building, and we've restored almost all of them. We're not quite done yet, but we're getting there at a painstaking pace. You know, my director of architecture said, do you want it done fast or do you want it done right? So we're working through it, and we're still a few $1,000s short of that campaign goal. So if you all want to support it, we're welcoming you to do so. Tonight's program is the second of 7 events that we're hosting this year to commemorate the 350th anniversary of Bacon's Rebellion. We have an absolute rock star panel for you all this evening, as you can see here. We'll introduce them in just a moment. But what better place to have this discussion, to come together and reflect on this history, than on the very ground where a lot of it happened. A wonderful group of partners and sponsors made tonight possible. Those include the Pamunkey Indian Tribe, Rappahannock Indian Tribe, Nottoway Indian Tribe, Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation, our colleagues at Jamestown Rediscovery just across the river there, and we also have support from Virginia Humanities and William and Mary to pull this program off. But I'd be remiss for not thanking the person who was really the brainchild that made all this happen, our Director of Interpretation and Collections, Elise Whirling. Elise wears many hats at our organization and puts a lot of miles on her car, but she really had the idea to take advantage of the 350th of this event to kind of stand out above the 250th events that are happening around the rest of the Commonwealth. Because Bacon's Rebellion is a very complicated but appropriated chapter in Virginia history, and we're trying to set the record straight and share a lot of different perspectives on what went on here and in other places in Virginia back in 1676. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elise Whirling.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to act as our moderator tonight with all of our wonderful panelists up here. Before we get started, I will introduce them all so you know who they are. And then just a quick housekeeping note, due to the fact that we have no PowerPoint ability out here, yet there are some key images that they will reference, we do have some laminated printouts that we're going to be passing around. So we kind of have one copy per row, and Lydia will hand them out to the ends of the rows, and as they reference them, I'll sort of hold them up, and then you can kind of pass that down the row so everybody can get a look at what it is we're talking about tonight. So first I have Brenna Garrity. She is right here. She is a public historian, and she is the education manager for Preservation Virginia, and she's worked here since 2020. She graduated from VCU School of World Studies and has a background in archaeology, curator for Jamestown Rediscovery and Preservation Virginia. She recently is the author of Following the Dragon, Chinese Ming Porcelain from James Fort, Jamestown, Virginia. And with Bly next to her, she co-curated the exhibition Following the Dragon, on view at Jamestown Settlement right now. Please don't miss it before it closes this summer. It's fantastic. So do journey back across the river and check that out if you haven't yet. So previously, Murray worked as the curator of collections at the Virginia Research Center for Archaeology, where she cataloged materials from 17th and 18th century Kings Mill plantation sites and the Drummond site, which we will reference tonight. And for a decade, she edited New Discoveries in Ceramics in America. She was also a member of the Smithsonian's Written in Bone exhibition team, which led the excavation of the home and burial of her 17th century Isle of Wight ancestor, Colonel Joseph Bridger. As I said, next to her is Bly Strobe, PhD, FSA, who is the senior curator at Jamestown Settlement, which is the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation. A proud fellow of the Society of Antiquaries since 2005, Bly earned her PhD in archaeology and ancient history from the University of Leicester, England. At JYF, she is using her 17th century brain to enhance the Jamestown settlement exhibition galleries. Bly served as Jamestown Rediscovery's senior curator for 21 years, where she curated over 1.5 million finds from the site. She has published and lectured extensively on 17th century Virginia, and her most recent article, co-authored with Murray, is on the collection of Sarah Drummond, will appear in Ceramics in America in 2026. At the other end is Ashley Spivey, PhD, who is a Pamunkey citizen and serves as the executive director of Kina Consulting. She is a historical anthropologist specializing in the archaeology and culture of Powhatan, Algonquin communities located in Tidewater, Virginia. Dr. Spivey's academic and professional experience has centered on supporting tribal sovereignty through tribal cultural and natural resource management and tribal historic preservation. As a member of the Pamunkey Indian tribe, Dr. Spivey has a close connection to the indigenous communities of Virginia. This has included developing indigenous-led cultural heritage and natural resource management strategies and facilitating administrative capacity building. Finally, next to me on my other side is Amy Stallings, PhD, a graduate of William & Mary who currently teaches for William & Mary's National Institute of American History and Democracy, known colloquially as NIAD. She also develops and presents programs for Jamestown Rediscovery Foundation, as she clearly did today, and she came straight from the island, fresh out of the 17th century. So here she is today in 2026. So there, Amy's research has contributed to the Women of Jamestown walking tours and created a variety of first-person interpretations, including performing as Lady Frances Berkeley, of course, the opinionated wife of Governor William Berkeley. So with that, we're going to get started, and I'm going to have Brenna here kind of set the scene of what was happening in Virginia at the time that Bacon's Rebellion really kicked off. Because we can't really talk about it unless we understand the context of what exactly is happening in this time period.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. So Virginia in the 1670s is a pretty different sociocultural landscape than Jamestown early days in the early 17th century. By this point, the colony has become a lot more established, and that's largely due to an influx of wealthier English immigrants during the English Civil War in the 1640s. So the colony is starting to get to a point where the population is growing naturally. We're seeing natural reproduction instead of the colony's population having to be supported by more English immigrants being brought in. But at the same time that the population's swelling, the economy is slowing down a little bit. So there's this big influx of money in the 1640s, 50s, and 60s. We start to see brick houses like this being constructed by those who can afford them. This one's built about 1665. It probably took several years to finish. But we start seeing these big investments being made in permanent architecture during that period. And now in the 1670s, it's starting to taper off. People are starting to feel that they're being overtaxed as well. So the colony is kind of poised for some sort of issue. Just a little issue. On top of that, the planters throughout Virginia are beginning to choose enslaved labor over indentured English labor more and more. This is enslaved Africans, but it's also enslaved indigenous people as well. And the colony at this time has recently passed some laws legalizing the enslavement of indigenous people who are captured in war. That'll be important later on. So the colony's looking for greater supply of enslaved labor, and the overall fabric of Virginia society is shifting from this very distinctly English carryover, make-do kind of society to a uniquely Virginian society in the late 17th century. We're starting to see that change. So some social norms are changing. There's a lot going on socially at this time. So a lot of colonists had originally come here. About 75% of people coming into Virginia from England were coming here as indentured servants. And historically, in England and in Virginia early on, those indentured servants would live in the same house with the person they're working for. But that is a social convention in England that's really made possible by knowing everybody in your town, in your bubble. And that wasn't the case here. There's this very diverse servant pool in Virginia, and there's a lot of unease coming from these planters as they're getting more people that they don't know in their households and more people that they have a greater degree of control over, because people don't like being under a huge degree of control. So there's a lot of people very unhappy, and the planters are picking up on this. So we're also starting to see what we'd call the proliferation of outbuildings at this time. So we're seeing separate structures being built to house enslaved and indentured servants. We're also seeing different outbuildings being constructed to house the work that those individuals do. So we're seeing a lot of change happen. A lot of those people who are coming here as indentured servants are also no longer getting access to the land that they felt they were promised. During the 1640s, Governor Berkeley had really granted a lot of land to friends, associates, people who were fleeing England from the English Civil War. And so now people are leaving their contract of indenture. They're not able to get any land. They're very frustrated about that on the frontier. So what do? They encroach on indigenous lands, lands that are by treaty supposed to stay in the hands of Native peoples. This, of course, starts a lot of fighting. The conflict with the Doeg is really one of the bigger ones in this scenario. So there's a lot of fighting going on. There's raids between towns and plantations. And this is also happening against the backdrop of King Philip's War in Massachusetts. So King Philip's War is a very bloody conflict between indigenous people in Massachusetts and English colonists. And there's a lot of anxiety that conflict is going to trickle down here to Virginia, and we're going to have a similar situation. So in 1676, in March, the colonial government convenes to basically decide what they're going to do, how they're going to secure the colony against these attacks. Now, part of the reason they're doing that is because of a case of mistaken identity. A lot of those people on the western frontier at the time are colonists who don't really understand the nuances of tribal identity, and they don't really care to learn. And they end up attacking a group of Susquehannock warriors instead of the Doeg warriors that they were pursuing. And the Susquehannocks had not been involved in this fight until now. Well, now we have a Susquehannock war on our hands, and there's a lot of fear that that's going to turn into another very, very intense version of King Philip's War here in Virginia. So the colony's going through a lot of change, a lot of transition, and there's also a lot of anxiety about indigenous people and the English relationship with them in 1676.
Briefly before we move on, can you touch on how Bacon's Castle kind of serves as a representation of all those physical changes in the architecture?
Yeah, so Bacon's Castle is really neat from an architectural lens because this house is built in the 1660s. It's built while we still have those cultural norms to a degree still at play of servants living inside the manor house. And so this house has an indoor kitchen, and that always catches people by surprise on house tours here because most folks who are used to touring southern plantation homes are used to seeing outdoor kitchens away from the manor house. But like we talked about, that was really born from the anxiety of these planters about having people who were enslaved and indentured, but mostly people who were enslaved, inside their house closer to the family. So we start to see these separated spaces being constructed. By the early 1700s, Bacon's Castle has pretty much moved all of its household functions to separate out buildings. So that includes a dairy, that's a kitchen, probably a brewing space because beer is going to be really important. They're making a lot of that. Pretty much anything that you can think of that would have been done in the household in England in the 17th century is in Virginia going to be done in a separate outbuilding. But Bacon's Castle is built right on that. Oh, I'm sorry, we should be saying the Allen House. The Allen House is built right on that cusp of time when it's still considered the norm to build in the traditional English way, but it could also be common to start building in this more divided, segregated kind of way.
Great. And I didn't mention this before, but we will have time for questions after. So write them down and keep them in your memory, and we'll solicit those later. So Ashley, Dr. Spivey, tell us about Indigenous communities' roles within the rebellion, and in particular, the role of Coca-Coesky's impact as Queen of the Pamunkey. What was her specific and unique role in this situation?
Okay, how much time do I have now? I think I've got 10 minutes tops. Well, to kind of set the scene, right, I want to talk about who was Coca-Coesky because it kind of gets into that broader question of what did, the indigenous world look like at the time of Bacon's Rebellion in 1676. First, I want to share a potential, possible interpretation of her name. So our people were Algonquin speakers, and we believe that her name, Coca-Coesky, which I am not pronouncing correctly, we don't really know the true pronunciation, meant something along the lines of someone who sits in the middle, which is so fitting for this woman and what she was doing at that time. She was literally sitting in the middle, not only between multiple different tribal nations, right, that she was engaging with as a leader within her own right, and I'll get more into that in a moment, but also in the middle between her people and the colony, right? So what a fitting name. And I have no doubt our names changed throughout our lifetime, depending on kind of what role we were playing throughout our life. And I have no doubt that name was given to her to demonstrate kind of the diplomatic and political acumen that she really represented for Indigenous people at the time. But so when she came into power, it was after the death of her husband, Totopotomoy, in 1656. An important note, he died as a ally to the British nation, right? We had a treaty with the nation, with England at that time, for about a decade. And one of those stipulations is that we're going to be buffers, human buffers to the frontier, basically. And we're going to help protect the colony when called upon from hostile Indians or other enemies of the colony. So, for example, Bacon and his men represented that, and I'll get more into that in a moment. But her husband was killed in battle, fighting a group of quote-unquote hostile Indians around Richmond in 1656. And after his death, she came into power as what we would have called the paramount leader at that time. By the time she came into power, and especially by Bacon's Rebellion, what you all have heard, I would assume, the Powhatan Paramount Chiefdom or the Powhatan Confederacy was very much dwindled by 1676. And she was actually fighting to kind of keep her hold as a paramount leader at that time over several tribes that were once allied under Chief Powhatan. And her uncle, Obi-Chan-Canoe, who became one of the paramount leaders after Powhatan's death, who led a uprising against the colony in 1644 and in 1622. So her uncle was responsible for but planning a very violent attack against the colony on two different occasions, and which led to the signing of the 1646 Treaty of Nicotolance. He was known as King of the Indians at that time. And so this is her uncle, right? And that, is not going unnoticed by colonial leaders, that this is kind of the lineage that she's coming from. And she is operating under the 1646 treaty, but also another peace agreement that had been signed and negotiated with the governor in 1676 in March. And the other important component kind of what makes her unique at this point in time, I mean, can we look to many female leaders in colonial Virginia at that time? Not really. So here we have an indigenous woman, a woman of color, who was very much well respected within not only the indigenous community, but the colony itself. And I can't get into all of the documents that kind of support, I think, the respect that she garnered among the men who were in charge, of the colony of Virginia. But she was in charge because our communities were matrilineal at this time. And what I mean by that, it's complicated, but for example, when you were born into the community, the tribe that your mother was from, right? You always know who the mom is. You can always maybe guess at who the dad is, right? So I'm joking, but really. You're born into the tribe that your mother belongs to, and the paramount leadership that went down from one relative to the next, it was inherited, was based off of a matriline, a leadership matriline that was Pamunkey. And so, for example, I'm going to probably butcher this, but the way that she came into power, the way that it worked is you have a matriline, a leadership matriline, right? And typically, you would have the male individuals of that female line that would come into power, right? And then it would be, typically the male individuals of that matriline had passed on, it would not go to their children, right? It would go into the female individuals of that matriline and then to their children, for example. So Kakakoeske was a part of that Pamunkey matriline, leadership matriline, as was Opechancanough, as was Opichipam before him, as was Wahan Seneca, also known as Chief Powhatan before him, and we don't know the names, of those before him. So just kind of setting the stage for the role that Kakakoeske was playing at that time. So she, at this time, is a woman, which is unique, expressing and working and demonstrating the tribal sovereignty of the Pamunkey Indian people, right? We still had a government in place. We have never not had a government in place. I think we can say that we are probably we have one of the oldest continuously operating indigenous governments in the United States, as well as one of the oldest continually occupied Indian reservations in the United States. We're still there. You can come visit us. It's in King William County. We say it was established through the 1646 treaty, which did define what was English versus Indian land. So she is governing her people. They, at that time, through treaty, were known as tributary Indians. Oh, I'm so sorry. or friendly Indians, meaning that these were indigenous communities that had signed treaties, negotiated treaties with England. And as I mentioned, they are still serving as that human buffer, on the western frontier of the colony, the frontier as we knew it in 1676. Now, in 1676, with the rising conflict that Nathaniel Bacon and his men were presenting, she was brought before the governor's council to ask that she basically start implementing one of the articles of the treaty. We need warriors. We need support from our tributary Indians. She gave them hell for a little while. She refused to speak English. She would only, communicate through her interpreter. It's very highly suspected that she knew English, but she's politically savvy, so she's making it difficult for them. She did acquiesce to give 12 warriors to the colony's efforts to fight against Bacon and his men, although it was suspected that she had probably 150 men that she could have put towards the effort, but she gave 12. And I think that's strategic too, and I'll get into it, but we mentioned that if indigenous peoples were captured in war, then they could be sold into slavery. And that is a practice that began very early on in the colony's history. So I think it was also probably strategic on her end. She didn't want to give up all of her men, because if they were captured, they would all be sold off as slaves. So Pamunkey was attacked by Bacon's men, even though, again, they're tributary and allies to the colony. These men killed Pamunkey women and children and captured, I think, around 45 men. And again, those men were taken and they were sold into slavery. It did end up fleeing for about 2 weeks into Dragon Swamp, which was this, marshy area. Now, granted, we can find food and medicine in the marsh, but because she was fleeing from this violence and remained there for about 2 weeks, when she was able to emerge, she was not in a good place. And there was a lot of effort, I think, from the colonial leaders at that time to kind of acquiesce the situation that Kakokwesque had found herself in after Bacon and his men attacked her people. They tried to take claim to her land. One of the potential, I think, reasons why Bacon targeted indigenous communities, there was many, but one of them was because if there was Indian land that was abandoned, then colonists could take that land and use it for their own purposes. So why not get rid of them and take that land that these folks felt that they were owed, right? So she petitioned the General Assembly in 1677 of February, asking for the tribe's lands and her belongings be restored. And the response from the General Assembly was, nobody should be surprised. Well, you have to prove that the things you lost actually belong to you. Oh, and all that stuff that you borrowed from the English, we need that back. Now, the King's commissioners who were in place kind of investigating the situation with Bacon's rebellion were much more helpful to her situation than the General Assembly folks were. And they recommended that she would be gifted, as well as other indigenous leaders, for the violence that had been done against them. And by 1677, in May of that year, there were multiple tribes, I think Nottoway, Nansemond, Pamunkey, I'm forgetting one, somebody help me. Rappahannock. Well, they didn't sign. Okay, I'm not alone in forgetting. Some tribes. Wayne-Oak negotiated another treaty with England, a proxy, right, through the colony and the leaders in the colony. That treaty is known as Middle Plantation, the Treaty of Middle Plantation. It is in many ways a re-articulation of the 1646 treaty, which I won't get into all of those articles, but the attempt was made to, again, restore lands, set boundaries against colonists on, the inalienable Indian lands. We all know how that went. We only have 1,200 acres left of our lands, and various other stipulations. But one of the interesting things, and I won't get into too much detail now, that the treaty did establish was Kakokwesque was attempting to kind of reestablish her authority within the larger indigenous community, and was able to convince the English through the treaty that, we've had these other tribes, the Rappahannock, for example, Chickahominy, who you will sign on their behalf, because in many ways, historically, they had been affiliated with the paramount chiefdom as allies at one point in time. And so she, through that treaty, was trying to kind of reestablish her authority within the indigenous community. It didn't go so well after 1677, but I don't have time to get into that. But yes, one of the gifts that I had mentioned is a silver frontlet, right? We think that maybe this is, in the record, I think it's referred to as necklace. We think maybe that is what is the frontlet there. It's made out of pure silver. Just a quick note, the robe that she's wearing and the bracelet were also gifts that were commissioned for her as well. These were not given to her at the signing of the treaty. They were delivered later. But the silver frontlet is one of the only objects that we know that still survives today. And it was in the care and stewardship of Preservation Virginia for over a century. and then it was repatriated to back to the Pamunkey Indian tribe. I'm horrible. I don't remember the date.
I think it was maybe
2000
years ago.
I don't even know. 2017? 2000. I worked on this. I should know. 2017. Right. So the Pamunkey now officially owns that frontlet again after over almost 300 or 350 years later. So. Do you want to say Ethan's? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Elise. You're a good moderator. The artist of this piece is Ethan Brown, and he is a Pamunkey Indian tribal citizen, a prolific artist. I'm a huge fan of his work. So you guys should look him up because he's got pieces all over the state, including the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. This picture is another one of his. I don't know if you have the description, but
He wrote one, but
okay. But this is I think an image of
this is
Kakakoeske fleeing or hiding right in Jagan Swamp. So yeah.
And if you want to learn more about that, come to our July lecture at Jamestown Settlement. And Ethan created this artwork specific to that lecture. So they'll certainly talk about this more in detail there, but it's obviously related to tonight as well. So we wanted to bring it out tonight to show you as well because it's such a wonderful piece. Did you have any last things, Ashley?
I could talk forever, so I'm going to stop and wait for some questions during the question and answer. Thank
Great.
you.
And I realized we never really, if you didn't come to our first lecture in April, you might need a little background on Bacon himself. Brenna, can you give us the quickest, dirtiest summary of what he did and then he died? This is not about men tonight, okay?
I don't think you want the quickest, dirtiest one I could give you. I do not like Nathaniel Bacon. Yes. Nathaniel Bacon was a young English aristocrat who was exiled from England for basically committing legal fraud. And he comes to Virginia with enough money from his daddy in his pocket to buy 2 plantations here in Virginia. He buys one called Curl's Neck, and the other one is Curl's Neck is in Henrico. The other one is Bacon's Quarter, which was also in Henrico. Now it's it's very close to the creek where Totopotomoy was killed. It's actually like in my neighborhood, so. But the Nathaniel Bacon, the problem with him is that he comes to Virginia and he is seeking power. He's trying to grab power however he can. He's been very much disgraced in England. And when he comes here, he is living on the frontier, right? He's living in Henrico, and he's basically hearing from a lot of his neighbors that the governor is doing this, we're being taxed unfairly, the governor's not letting us take this land from the native people that we're entitled to, and the governor's just siding with the native people instead of the English. Why is he doing that? So there's a lot of unrest starting to foment on the frontier. It's not really the case out here for a lot of people on the eastern side of the colony. They're not really upset with the governor too much. But on the frontier, people are really mad. And Nathaniel Bacon really becomes the kind of a lightning rod for that. He really kind of channels a lot of the upset and mistrust. And he also feels very strongly that the colonists should be able to have as much land as they want. And he kind of pitches this idea to a lot of fellow colonists of basically a genocide of indigenous people here in Virginia. He thinks that he should be able to clear the land for more English colonization. And so it's kind of an early format of the idea of manifest destiny that we're seeing, which, fun fact, I'm not going to do this all night. Fun fact, the guy who coined the phrase manifest destiny, his brother and sister lived here at Bacon's Castle. And then the brother went on to cause the first deadly train accident in American history. I could go on. You ask me later what the sister's name was. It's wild. Okay, I'll stop now.
So he did get mad.
Yes, so Nathaniel Bacon gets really mad. Sorry. I know way too much about this place, and it like seeps out in weird ways. So Nathaniel Bacon, he at first is on the governor's council, but he is essentially encouraging colonists to rally against the governor, and so the governor takes him off the council. And Nathaniel Bacon gets really upset about that. And so he ends up leading about 500 men to Jamestown in June to strong-arm a commission to basically be a general of an army and go fight indigenous people on the frontier. And at first, the governor does not want to do that. He does not want to break these treaties. But Nathaniel Bacon brings 500 armed men and points them at the governor's council building, and their hand is forced, and they give him the commission. Berkeley regrets this immediately, but it's too little too late, and Bacon begins his rampage. The governor then is going into hiding on the frontier, not on the frontier, on the eastern shore. Thank you. And no, thank you. And so a lot of his supporters go with him, including Arthur Allen II, who owned this house at the time. And a lot of Bacon's men are kind of marauding around the colony. They're attacking not just indigenous people, they're also attacking anyone who supports the governor as well. And this rebellion goes on for about 6 months in total. In September, he leads the rebels to Jamestown, where they burn it to the ground. This is the capital of the colony at the time. There's one fellow who burns his own house down. It's a crazy time. And ultimately, the rebellion will kind of end with the death of Nathaniel Bacon, but it takes a little while to kind of fizzle out all of the rest of the embers that are still going in the colony. Is that a good, quick, and dirty?
Yeah, I think that kind of gives us some more context. So Amy, Kakakoeske was a woman who held an incredible leadership role within the indigenous community, but a contemporary foil is Lady Berkeley, who did not hold an official role, but was a very active partner to a male English leader. Can you explain her very different perspective?
Okay. I will have to talk about men a little because I love my fake husband, Sir William Berkeley. Genuinely. He has they both do have some really great one-liners about Nathaniel Bacon and how much they loathe Nathaniel Bacon. But to complicate matters further, Nathaniel Bacon is Lady Berkeley's cousin. So there are, I would say, two things that are most foremost in Lady Berkeley's mind, in Sir William Berkeley's mind, in the minds of their cohort. The first is the English Civil War, so I'm really glad that Brenda brought that up earlier. It was a while ago now. But if you remember back to the 1640s when the English Civil War was raging abroad, Sir William Berkeley has been appointed to the governorship straight out of the court of Charles I. He is a personal friend of the king. And that means that he has a very particular outlook when his friend's life and government are jeopardized back home. Lady Berkeley's family are the Culpepers. So, very famous name, but her father, Thomas Culpeper, ends up he is one of 4 Thomas Culpepers fighting in the king's cause here, so very confusing to try to trace where is her dad at any given point in the English Civil War. But at some point, he ends up at the siege of Colchester. That does not go well for the Royalists, and he is imprisoned and offered by Cromwell's army an alternative. He can either be made a galley slave, or he can forfeit all his property and get out of Dodge. So he chooses the latter option. They forfeit their property, and he gets a very dubious land grant from the exiled Charles II, who's somewhere in France, and they come to Virginia. So she's coming from the same sort of royalist stronghold background that Sir William Berkeley is, even though there is a 29-year age difference between these two. But both of them, during Bacon's rebellion, are going to make references to this as an aftershock of the English Civil War in a couple of different ways. Sir William Berkeley actually thinks it might be providential. He talks about the unrest both in Massachusetts with King Philip's War and the unrest spilling over into Virginia as being God's punishment for the murder of King Charles I. And he said, I didn't expect this to rebound upon Virginia. The Puritans in Massachusetts, sure, they were bound to be punished by God for killing the king. But us, we were royalists here. I don't know why this is happening to us, but he is still looking for those sort of divine attributions for everything he sees. He is a staunch Anglican. He is the real deal. And one of the things that he hates about Nathaniel Bacon is that Nathaniel Bacon swears too much. I love this man. Anyway. So, this long shadow of the English Civil War is going to persist through Bacon's rebellion, and even determine the outcome for some people in Bacon's rebellion. There's a wonderful little exchange between one of the three commissioners, Francis Morrison, who is a longtime friend of the Berkeleys, and this is where you start to see the friendship disintegrate, and it's so sad, really. But he writes to Lady Berkeley in 1677 and says, we've just heard that this guy, Jones, I think is his surname, he's currently imprisoned. He's set to be executed as a rebel, but we've discovered that he was a royalist in the English Civil War. So could you please intercede with Sir William Berkeley and ask him to pardon this man, Jones? And she writes back and says, mercy is as inherent in my husband as in me, and essentially says, you just needed to say royalist. And the guy gets pardoned. He will later foment some additional unrest, and I think Lady Berkeley is probably ticked off that they pardoned Jones. But because he had been loyal to the king once before, it sort of was assumed that he must have been duped somehow into joining Bacon's forces, because surely this man would not seek to overthrow the establishment if he really knew all the facts. And there are a lot of people who come back to the government afterwards and say, I was forced at gunpoint to sign an oath of allegiance to Nathaniel Bacon. So he is going around the country just busting up people's houses and having them sign oaths of allegiance to him. The other thing, though, for Lady Berkeley's perspective is going to be loyalty to family, and the sense that Nathaniel Bacon has betrayed in a fundamental way the loyalty that was due to her as a family member, especially someone who had tried to advocate for him, had his wife to stay with her at Green Spring Plantation for multiple weeks. And she writes this affidavit wherein she really takes Bacon to task for presuming to offer money in compensation for his wife's stay with Lady Berkeley, and how insulting this was, that as a member of his family he would try to throw a purse at her instead of just assuming that this was gratis, this was noblesse oblige, this was family. So she accuses him of ingratitude and that of a very deep dye. So one thing that I think probably, maybe I should clarify. I think this is history of the world according to Amy Stallings, mind you, but I think Sir William and Lady Berkeley both are deeply intellectual people. Sir William has 2 degrees from Oxford University at a time when he just needed to attend Oxford and everyone would know how posh he was. He actually bothered to stay, get 2 degrees, and he was a fellow of Merton College. This is an educational wasteland in Virginia at the time. And Lady Berkeley would have had a very posh upbringing as well. We know, for instance, she's also cousins by marriage with William Penn, and they're in communication later in her life, and she reads some of Penn's works, treatises on religious freedom. But when Bacon comes to Virginia, he is a Cambridge-educated man. And I think one of the things Sir William says is that men of your quality very seldom come into this country, and so when they do, I try to treat them with the utmost respect. that this is someone that they wanted initially to cultivate a relationship with. Not only is he bringing the latest news from England, he and his wife is actually of probably a higher station than Bacon himself. So they are able to converse at the Berkeley's level and provide them with some of the culture that perhaps they feel that they've been lacking here. And so this is one of the reasons I think Berkeley and Lady Berkeley, they want to take advantage of the education and the genuine abilities that Bacon has. Unfortunately, most of them are how to deceive other people. Those are his most sterling qualities. But it takes them both a while to come to terms with that. So for the Berkeleys, this is really the ultimate betrayal. And they're always going to view it as personal as well as political. And Lady Berkeley is very active politically. So I don't want to take away from that angle. She goes and advocates for her husband before the Lords of Trade and petitions the Crown on his behalf, trying to tell his side of the story back in England. And then she's going to carry on defending him when it's unnecessary after his death. She's going to be sued in 1678 by Sarah Drummond, who you'll hear about, my nemesis. And the record of the court case is lost. However, what is interesting is that from the notes we have from 19th century historians who saw it, they remark that although it's Lady Berkeley who's being sued for 104 pounds sterling damages, which she then has to cough up, but the case doesn't confine itself to those parameters. The historians say that it delves very deeply into the character of Sir William Berkeley and the events of the late rebellion. So it's clear that these two women are just hashing it all out in court, and Lady Berkeley goes to bat for Sir William and his interests well after his death. So I would argue that although this is a panel about women's perspectives, that she and her husband move in lockstep here, and that pretty much everything she does, yes, it's in her own interests, but at the bottom of it all is her loyalty to Sir William Berkeley.
Thank you, Amy. Did they meet and get married here? Or
Well,
was it?
yes. So this is a second marriage for both of them. We don't know anything about his first wife, but we know that he was married around 1652. Because somebody back in England writes, Will Berkeley is lately married in Virginia. And then we've got a couple of letters that are addressed to Lady Berkeley, but they don't specify who is that. It's really frustrating. And we don't know when she dies or what of. But my Lady Berkeley, Lady Frances, had been married off at the age of 18 to Samuel Stevens, and this is a whole nother soap opera because he is the stepson of another Virginia governor, Sir John Harvey, who's most famous for being put under citizen's arrest by his own council and sent back to England. But secondly most famous for punching out the teeth of Samuel Stevens' dad, Richard Stevens, and then later marrying the widow. So, it's a character for sure. But Samuel Stevens was governor of the Albemarle, and he takes over as governor of the Albemarle after William Drummond falls into some disgrace with Sir William Berkeley for criticizing Sir William's policies. So, again, you'll hear more about all of this drama in a moment.
So we've heard an indigenous perspective and Lady Berkeley's loyalist perspective, and we have to turn the tables a little bit to some women involved with the rebels themselves. So Bly and Murray, can you speak to Sarah Drummond, who we've gotten a little taste of, and then Sarah Grendon as well?
Okay. It's very true that we don't know very much about women in the 17th century unless they do something naughty, and then they get recorded, right? So these are two women who found their way into the pages of history because they were involved with the rebel Bacon. And one historian calls them newswives. They spread the news of the rebellion through the community and got all the people sort of riled up about things. this is called, and there's a great term for this, brabbling. Have you ever heard of that? There's a great book by Terry Snyder, very readable, not very thick, all about brabbling. And this is gossiping, spreading malicious rumors on the, considered on the part of the authorities that it's malicious rumor. And so this is one way women could exert power. They didn't have power. As Brenna was saying, a lot of the sort of English common law was attempted to be transferred into Virginia. It didn't always work very successfully because there's great mortality. The ratio of men to women was tremendous, very huge, like 6-to-1 at one point. Settlements were very far apart. They weren't together. So there was this thing called the English common law doctrine of coverture, whereby the husband, the man of the family, was head of the entire family, the women, the wives, the children, the servants, slaves, enslaved people. One historian says, women were just treated just like children or mentally incapable people. They were just sort of governed by this law. And they didn't have any legal identity. They could not make contracts. They couldn't litigate suits. They could not even convey property. However, if you were a single woman or a widow, you were considered a femme sole instead of a femme couverte. So you did have more rights and abilities to do things. And a lot of the women and the one woman, Sarah Grendon, that I'll be briefly talking about, because we don't really know that much about her, but she moved up in society by sequential marriages. She was widowed and married up and acquiring the property of her husband each time. Widows became very powerful. They were desired by especially by the younger men who were coming in, who wanted to acquire property, and this was one way to do it. We're talking about two Sarahs. The first Sarah is Sarah Harris Stegg Grendon, and then she marries a Brain after, that's his name, after Bacon's Rebellion. So her Harris was a merchant, and Stegg was a merchant and trader. He was also in the government, in the colonial government. She really acquired most of her wealth through Stegg, who was the uncle of William Byrd. So she's aunt through marriage. And there was a long-standing fight with Berkeley and the Byrds. So this sort of plays into this whole thing, this animus towards Sarah Grendon. She was called by Berkeley a great encourager and assister in the late Horrid Rebellion, that she helped the rebels with her lying and scandalous reports. And she even did provide material support. There was and she actually said, and Berkeley took great offense to this, that he was a greater friend to the Indians than to the English. That really struck deeply. When I should go back and say, when Stegg died in 1617, he left his estate to his nephew. That's primogeniture. That's usually the way it works. But he stipulated that Sarah was to manage the estate until Byrd, who was only 18, became capable of doing that. So Sarah Grendon had great control over property and capital. She was a pretty powerful person. Now Stegg, being a trader, was involved with the fur trade and was trading with the indigenous peoples on the periphery. And one thing that played into Bacon's Rebellion and really galled a lot of the people was that Berkeley was restricting that trade to his group of cronies. So you had to get a special permission to trade, and this was cutting into their profits. So especially, Sarah Grandin was not one of those receiving this certificate to trade. After Bacon's Rebellion, the Act of Indemnity and Pardon was passed by the Assembly in February 1677. The women involved in the rebellion were charged with seditious libel, but not treason. If they were married, if they were a femme covert, they were punished by whipping, 20 lashes. They could get out of it by financial, paying for it. 1,000 pounds of tobacco was mentioned. Except Sarah Grandin, she was the only one who Berkeley refused to release from this. So she was charged with treason, which meant that her husband's estate would be seized. Now, where was her husband? He was in England during the whole rebellion. So really, she was working as a femme sole. She was running the estate. She was doing the trading, and she was working on her own. So he comes back from England and goes to court on her behalf and gets her to declare that her words and deed were those of an ignorant woman. So she had to go back and be a femme covert, say, no, he wasn't here and I didn't know what I was doing. And so, yeah, all right. So she could use the common law to her advantage, I guess, at this point, to prevent the property being taken away from her and from her possibly losing her life. So we don't know much more about that, except that, as I mentioned, she did marry, I think his name was Edward Brain, after Bacon's Rebellion, and her nephew got very upset about this because, of course, she still has control over a lot of the estate and money, and he thinks that she just has to have a man to lie with, is what he says, and that she's going to lose all the money. It's going to be squandered. So, yeah. Well, that really fit in with the
missed my opportunity.
Yeah,
There's a
right.
good map at the top, and I messed up.
Yeah, there is a map that kind of shows the spread of English habitation. And one of the reasons for Bacon's Rebellion was because those poorer individuals, most of them were, the lesser individuals that could not get the prime land around Jamestown. They were pushed out into the periphery, were butting up against the indigenous habitation and pushing into it. So this map sort of really shows that. If you, I think you each have one of those. And so now we can talk about Sarah Drummond.
And like Lady Barclay, I do have to mention her husband, because not much is known about her from the period that preceded Bacon's Rebellion. William Drummond was an indentured servant who arrived in Virginia in 1637, and by 1648, he had acquired 25 acres on the governor's land near Jamestown, and that was a couple of thousand acres of land that was given to the royal governors to lease to tenants to help maintain their office. So by in the 1650s, he married Sarah, and they went on to have 5 children. He was the first governor of the Albemarle that became North Carolina, and he was only there for a couple of years, from 1665 until 1667, I believe, when he was replaced with Lady Berkeley's first husband, because he did object to the policies of Governor Berkeley against the residents of the Albemarle, and that is when their clashes began. He also complained that Berkeley would not allow Sarah and the children come to live with him. That was another complaint. And I think that is the beginning of their animosity. It occurred in Albemarle in North Carolina. Well, in 1660, Sarah inherited land on Jamestown Island from her cousin Edward Prescott. And they went on to build a home on the island that was said to be the finest brick home, one of the finest brick homes on Jamestown Island. But really, their main home was on the governor's land. And in 1671, clever William Drummond talked the state government, the legislature, into giving leases on the land for up to 99 years. Well, I don't think Berkeley liked that deal either. It was sort of underhanded, and by that time, Drummond had acquired 235 acres of the governor's land. So Berkeley was not very happy with that. Well, by the time of Bacon's rebellion, there was such animosity that Berkeley joined Bacon's forces. And
No, Drummond did.
oh, excuse me, Berkeley. Drummond joined. Drummond. Oh, poor lady, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. I always think of her as Lady Berkeley. She passes my window at work every day, and I'm thinking, oh my God, there she goes. She hates me. She really is my nemesis. So, anyway, he joins the forces of Bacon, not Berkeley, and he was the gentleman who burned his own house down on September 19th, 1676. He did save the county records, which was, or the government records, which was a wonderful thing, but they were burned during the Civil War, unfortunately. So, of course, you know, the rebellion fizzled out after Bacon's death, and what's his name, Drummond, was captured. I've heard so many dates and peoples, I'm getting confused. So Drummond was captured in January 1677, and he was tried and hanged on January the 20th, 1677. Well, of course, poor Mrs. Drummond was distraught. I mean, she supported her husband as strongly as Lady Berkeley supported her husband. And so and then apparently Berkeley had his army raid the house of Sarah Drummond and take all their possessions. And so, and she claimed that she was set out turned out of the house and wandered in the woods for a while. So she also petitioned the lords of trade and plantations. And I want to read something that she wrote in her letter. I guess I have to hold both. Take my glasses off. She wrote the humble petition of Sarah Drummond, in which she argued that her husband was not given a proper trial with a jury, thus was wrongly executed. She wrote that he was sentenced to die by martial law, although he never bore arms or any military office, not being permitted to answer for himself or reserved for trial, according to the known laws of his majesty, of the majesty's kingdom. And then she said the seizure left her and her 5 children starving and wandering in the wilderness. The next day, she wrote another petition and asked that possessions seized from the ship, I can't remember the name of the ship, but included 5 casks of brandy and a trunk with cloth and pewter plate. Yeah. Well, the king granted that, or wrote a letter saying that her possessions should be returned. So luckily, they were returned to her. In 1678, she sued Lady Berkeley, and she won that suit. Now, I am more familiar with the material culture from the Drummond site, having excavated there for a few years. And although she was said to be disloyal to the crown, we found artifacts that tell us quite the opposite. We found a fire bag that bears the King Charles. It's kind of hard to see. You might have to pass it around. It's King Charles, and the intact fire bag that that Bly actually found the parallel to is dated 1647, I believe. 74, sorry. And the it also.
The intact one was found in Chequers, the Prime Minister's home. Wow. And it does show King Charles trampling Cromwell.
Cromwell, yeah.
But it's a really interesting story in that it's based on a statue that was put up in Stocks Market in London, and the person who got the statue was the goldsmith to the king, and he was trying to curry favor with him. He purchased the statue in Italy, and it actually was showing the King of Poland trampling a Turk. So he had someone modify the faces, but you'll see if you look at it that Cromwell's still wearing a turban. So no, it was not a very popular statue, and now it's overlooking a car park somewhere in northern England. So.
We also found ceramics that portray William and Mary. It commemorates the marriage of William and Mary. We found a Rhenish stoneware jug that has a medallion that commemorates King William. And they apparently were richly compensated because the ceramics from the site, oh yes, and especially want to talk about this because Sarah said her husband had no arms Well, that's because she buried her husband's sword on her plantation, which we excavated.
It's on display at the settlement, in case you want to see it. Come to the settlement.
So you want to pass that around? Oh, you have one. Okay. We also have the latest in ceramics from the site, including tin glazed earthenware porringers, and we were able to tell from the inventory taken of Sarah's property that although she apparently used pewter plates for dining, she continued to do that after his death because we found no tin glazed earthenware plates on the site. However, the pewter porringers that are listed in the inventory were apparently replaced with tin glazed earthenware porringers. You can see a gold ring found on the site. They were very well equipped. For toiletry, I think we found 8 to 10 basins that were used for toiletry purposes, and they would have fit into furniture. We found a tiny chamber pot. Never seen one on any other archaeological site, but she had a young child at this time who used that baby chamber pot. And the latest fashions in drinkware, posset pots, 3 tin glazed earthenware posset pots. We found several little cups that may have been used for drinking tea. And what else, Blank, did we find?
I think you pretty well covered it.
Yeah, I think so.
I think one important thing to sort of note is that some historians have said, yes, she was, petitioning the king for restitution, this king that she hated so much. But as Marie has said, we have found evidence that they appear to have been royalists, and it's the same with Bacon. If you read what he writes, he's not protesting the king. He's protesting Berkeley and his corrupt policies, and so, in their eyes. So there's a just very fine difference. You can't, paint them as rebelling like our revolution that we are just about to celebrate the anniversary of. It wasn't like that. It wasn't a revolution against England. It was against the colonial government.
May I add a distinction? That in the eyes of someone like Sir William Berkeley, they are one and the same.
Exactly. That was his argument.
Yes, because he's directly appointed by the crown.
Right.
And represents the king, for Virginia. And as such, you also see comments by Lady Berkeley that refer to how finely she dresses, that the rebels say they will make her wear sailcloth, essentially. Canvas linen is what they say, and be proud or be glad of it. So the implication being that she dresses too high for Virginia, but the point is that's a mark of respect, the same way you dress up when you go to a fine dinner or you go to church. It's not that you, strictly speaking, have to, but that is your way of paying respect and deference to, in this case, the authority of the king embodied by Sir William Berkeley. So that is certainly his perspective. And again, coming out of the Civil War, everything in his life post-English Civil War is viewed through the lens of the English Civil War and everything that entailed.
So, Brenna, our last perspective is that of Elizabeth Blesley. a witness to the rebellion here at the castle. She weathered the storm when Bacon's men took control of this very house and ransacked it for about 3 months. And can you touch on her story a little bit?
Yeah, so this is breaking news. We, up until this point, have been calling her Elizabeth Beasley. I've been looking very, very deeply at a lot of original documents, and I think it's Blesley. And this is a name from Somerset in England. So she's born there about 1644. So she's actually a little bit older than we thought, too. But, I mean, who among us hasn't said, oh, I'm 29 in a court deposition? I mean, come on. So Elizabeth, she is the daughter of a man named John Blesley and his wife Elizabeth. And when her father dies, she basically contracts with a planter. She signs an indenture for 4 years, and he's to send her to Virginia. So he contracts with a ship, the Samuel and Mary, which carried a lot of indentured servants over here from Bristol. And when she arrives in Virginia, her indenture is sold. This is pretty typical. So indentured servants would come here, and then the captain or the agent who was with them would sell their indentures at the docks to different planters. And Elizabeth's indenture is bought by Arthur Allen II. So he is the owner of this castle here, and he's only in his late teens to early 20s at this time. He's very, very young, but his father's just passed away just a few months before this in June of 1669. Elizabeth arrives here probably about November of 1669. She signs that indenture in August. And when she comes to his house, she's probably realizing this is a pretty good situation. This house is roughly 14 times the size of your average Virginia home for the period. It's built in brick, which is a huge undertaking, as I said before. It also is very well stocked. It's very well equipped. He has thousands of acres, and he has a lot of other laborers as well, both enslaved and free, or free, indentured, we'll say that. One potential free hired person, but that's not clear. Anyway, so when she comes here, she is probably filling a role that has been vacated recently with 2 other indentured women's times of service coming up. One of them is Anne North, who's a spinster, and then the other one is someone whose name I don't remember. But they're both domestic servants. And the spinster at this time is someone who spins, someone who's a craft person in producing yarn and thread. So Elizabeth's probably coming here and taking on kind of parts of both of those roles. She's about 25 at the time. She's definitely capable of taking on pretty intense domestic labor. So she's probably doing that. Now, English indentured women did sometimes work in fields, but for the upper class especially, this was not really smiled upon. As we're seeing more and more enslaved servants coming into play, we're starting to see this cultural shift towards English women should work in the domestic sphere. They should not work in the fields. That is for women who are other. So Elizabeth's probably not working in field capacity. We know that by the time of Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, her indenture has run out. Her indenture would have been up in 1673. And clearly she makes the choice to stay here. Now, I also like this little bit about Elizabeth. She probably has ample opportunity to get married. Like we were talking about, the gender imbalance here in the Chesapeake was pretty high. Lots of men, not a lot of women. So Elizabeth, after her father died first in England, she had a couple of options. Thanks to King Henry VIII and the destruction of the monasteries and convents, she could not join a nunnery. So her options instead were to become a servant or to marry somebody right away. And she chooses to sell her labor. She chooses to become a servant. She misses that opportunity. She does not want anything to do with it, I guess. She comes here and she still chooses not to marry after her time of indenture comes up. Now, indentured servants couldn't get married while they were indentured, but she chooses that she's going to remain single even after her indenture comes up. And she stays in the Allen house for at least 4 more years after 1673. So by the time of Bacon's Rebellion, she seems to be occupying a role similar to a housekeeper. Now, she would not have thought of herself in those terms. Housekeeper in the 17th century to the English meant a homeowner, someone who owns a house. So she wouldn't have been that, but we can kind of think of it in those terms. So she's probably managing sort of the day-to-day ins and outs of what goes into basically running a massive country manor like this. She's going to be in charge of some of the most valuable materials in the household, and that is the textiles. Textiles are only behind furniture, land, and silver in terms of value at this time. And lots of them are being imported from England. We also have some evidence that the Allens may have had equipment to produce some textiles on site here as well. But in 1676, really shortly after Bacon burns Jamestown, Elizabeth is packing a trunk full of tablecloths, women's shifts, that's the underclothes, aprons, pillowcases, sheets. She's packing up a really diverse array of textile goods in the house, along with some other items as well, some silver porringers she talks about, some other pewter dishes, some plate, and she talks about she's packed all that away. And she's probably doing that because Arthur Allen II has fled. He leaves his house and his mother and his servants, not winning Son of the Year award. And he, yes, I'll get to that. And he goes over into hiding on the Eastern Shore with the governor and other supporters. And so Elizabeth is probably trying to batten down the hatches here. She knows that Arthur Allen, because he is the only member of the Surrey County government who refused to send aid to Nathaniel Bacon, he was the only nay vote in the room, he's got a target on his back because of that. And his house is really fancy, and it's definitely one of the only ones like this in the area, so it's likely that the rebels are going to target it. So Elizabeth's packing all this stuff up for safekeeping, and then a couple of days later, the rebels come in. They take over the house. She says they made what havoc they pleased within door and without, and also they turned the ancient gentlewoman out of doors. So basically, they turned Mrs. Allen out of the house. They kicked her out. And Elizabeth is the one that they go to with questions about where are the valuable goods in the house hidden? Where's the silver? And she refuses to tell them, or at least that's what she says in her court testimony later on. But they do find it somehow anyway, and they really ransack a lot of those textiles that she so carefully put away. And the court testimony of what happened in the Allen house during Bacon's Rebellion is very colorful. It's not from Elizabeth's account, but there's another witness who said they saw one of the rebels jamming tablecloths and sheets into his breeches to steal them, to carry them. I mean, think of those big 17th century, you could fit a lot of tablecloths in one of those. And so Elizabeth's here for all of that. She's witnessing all of that too, but she's really, it appears she's trying to keep things together. So she probably has a separate sleeping quarter, because by this time that's kind of the model that we're moving towards. But we don't know for sure. So she may have had to keep sleeping in the house with the rebels. She may have had a little safe place she could scurry off to at night. But basically, she's trying to mitigate damage to the Allen house the whole time that the rebels are here. We know all of this wonderful stuff about her and the goods that were in the household because in 1677, Arthur Allen files a lawsuit against a lot of the rebels who are involved in damaging his house, one of whom is his own brother-in-law. So family dinners must have been real awkward after that. So Elizabeth is called as a witness, which is kind of interesting because she's a servant, but she's apparently higher status servant than most because she is called to give testimony, and she is basically the star witness in this case. And she has not only kept track of everything that was stolen or broken during the rebellion, she can even tell you exactly what fabrics all those tablecloth sheets and pillowcases were made of. She has this encyclopedic memory. I think she's a fascinating person. And so she is basically the reason the Allens are able to recoup most of the damages of what they had lost. Various estimates are between 800 to 1,000 pounds sterling of goods that the Allens lost during the rebellion, which doesn't really sound like that much today, but that was a lot of money back then. So Elizabeth, she is an indentured servant turned basically wage servant, and she is trying to kind of weather the storm here at Bacon's Castle. We don't really know what happens to her afterwards. Oh yeah, I am not. The visuals are for me. You guys don't get to see them. But the top one is the mention of her in a group of people that Arthur Allen claimed head rights on to expand his land holdings. So if you brought someone over from England, you were entitled to 50 acres of land. And so he claims head rights on a lot of people that he's brought over or who worked for him, because he didn't really bring Elizabeth over. He kind of just bought her indenture when she was here, but he does that a lot. And gets land that he's able to expand his land holdings. And the second one is her court testimony. So I mentioned she's born in 1644. It says Elizabeth Blesley, aged about 29 years, deposeth. She's 32. she might not know. I don't know. I'm 31, and I would definitely lie about my age in court if I had to. Yeah. She's well looked after. She doesn't really have much to lose, so she can kind of get away with stuff like that. And that's Elizabeth Blesley.
Thank you, Brenna. And I'll give a plug for the Rebels trash. If you're interested in the trash they generated from that takeover of this house, please come to our August lecture where we're going to talk about archaeology. And Rebecca, I'll embarrass you, is gonna speak to that because they did leave. There was stuff that had to be thrown out afterwards, and luckily an amazing team of people, some of whom are here tonight, excavated a lot of that in the 80s, so we'll dig into that. I did not mean that pun. A little bit later this summer. And I know we're closing in past 7:30 at this point, but I do want to give an opportunity for a few questions. I'll probably cut it off at some point so that folks can check out the house. If you do want to quickly walk through it, we do have it open afterwards. And then, of course, you can come back. We're open Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. And then after Memorial Day, we open on Thursdays as well. But before we do that, are there any burning questions for this amazing group of people here? Yes.
Some quick where is questions. Where is the silver necklace of Coco Tuescu? Can you see it?
Good question, and I might need to lean on you to answer that. So, sorry, this keeps going in and out. Okay, so the original version, right, that was created and gifted to Kakako Koeske. Where is it? I thought it was at the museum. Okay, because it's switched hands a couple of times. So we have a museum on the Pamunkey Indian Reservation. It is not open to the public at the moment. It's closed for renovation. We're going to be doing new exhibitions there, but it's there. There's also a replica a silver, fully scaled everything replica that was done in, I think, 2014. I think that maybe JRF has that on display at the moment.
Is it on the island or at the settlement?
No, it's at the island,
Is
at
it?
the Archaearium.
Oh,
Right.
you can also Google Pamunkey frontlet, and there's great images of it as well.
It was reproduced by Colonial Williamsburg, and that is at the Archaearium Museum on Jamestown Island.
Okay, where is the Drummond site?
The Drummond site is about a mile from Jamestown Island, and it's on the governor's land. It's. Are you familiar with Drummond Field?
I'm not. I live in Governor's Land, but that's not really Governor's.
No. Yeah. It's
4-H camp.
Yes, okay.
and a little closer to Jamestown settlement. Yeah.
We have a question in the back.
How much land did the king give Berkeley when he came over here?
The governor's land. It's about 2,000 acres was given to the governors of not just 3,000, not just Berkeley, but all the governors of Virginia.
For the use of the current governor.
Yes, for the use of the current governor to have tenants to lease the land.
There's a fun provision. So one of the provisions in the 1640s, which is the provision under which Drummond leases the land, is that in the event the capital is attacked, you are required to defend Jamestown. Which he emphatically did not.
Yes, right here.
Do we know who advocated at court for Mrs. Drummond? I mean,
Her son-in-law was a lawyer who Samuel Swan advocated for her.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, what happened to Native women after the rebellion?
That's a great question.
How were they affected?
So I mentioned, right, that at the time of Kakakweske's leadership, we were a matrilineal society. So just a few decades after her death, she passed in the 1680s, we had two more female leaders after Kakakweske. Queen Betty and Queen Anne is the last known female leader. I think the last document that we have of her is 1713. A woman was not permitted to participate in tribal governance after Anne's tenure until 2012. So, the Pamunkey Indian tribe did a hard adoption of patriarchy soon after Bacon's Rebellion, right? And the aftermath of signing the Treaty of Middle Plantation, 1677. And what is so ironic, too, about that is many of the legal fights, right, that the Pamunkey have had over the centuries have tied back to that 1677 treaty, right, to uphold those rights. And it was signed by a woman. And women in the tribe did not get the opportunity to participate in government for 300 years. My mother, who asked the question, was the first woman to sit on tribal government in 300 years. Yay. So, and I don't know if you guys, this might be a little political, I apologize. I've heard this kind of whispered throughout, make America millennial again. Mama, the mama movement. That, so I'm just saying maybe things would be a little bit different, but right. But in all seriousness, right, by the time, Kakokose is passed, we have our last female leader in 1712. We are going through the motions, right, of engaging in the world that is around us, and that includes adopting and adapting to other ways of understanding, right, and surviving in the world. And when a community has been exposed, right, to a violent colonial and incursive government, you do what you can to survive and adapt over the last 400 years to that incursion and into that violence. I'm not trying to say that I support what the men have done, by the way, but it's something that our community has endured for quite some time. And so there was a major flip, and a lot of it had to do with the adoption of cultural norms that surrounded them, the adoption of Christianity, which of course is very patriarchal, and we're slowly making our way back to the other side of that.
Thank you. Yes.
You've all been pronouncing it Barkley, not Berkeley. Is there a reason for that? Barkley.
Because that's correct. It's still pronounced Barkley in England. Well, one of the ways that it's 17th century is notorious, of course, for imprecision in its spelling. But one of the ways which you do see it spelled is Barkley. So that suggests a pronunciation of R, Barkley, which is still the current pronunciation in England. Yeah.
Yes, right here.
Just a final question. I'm thinking you did such a wonderful display of banter and camaraderie. Is this something that's happened before, or will it happen again?
This panel here. Yeah, we'll do it again. We pulled this together for our series, and it kind of is, we all work together in various capacities, and it just seemed like there was, I knew Elizabeth Blesley's story from working here, and we knew our Jamestown colleagues and their research because we work for the same organization, and Ashley has been involved with Preservation Virginia for quite a long time, so it just was this great group of people. It's been a lot of fun planning this as well, because I think the textbooks are not going to tell you this story, if your textbook tells you about Bacon's Rebellion at all, to be frank. So this is just a goal of this series, is to highlight other stories that aren't otherwise going to be heard unless you come to a program at Jamestown or something like this. So with that, I'll plug our other events coming up. So it is May right now. In June, we have Dr. Michael Blakely, who is a professor of anthropology at William and Mary. He is going to be coming to lecture at Jamestown Island on the impacts that the rebellion had, particularly on Black communities in Virginia. I mean, we really didn't even get into how much the rebellion impacted free and enslaved, very particularly enslaved Black people living in Virginia on the time, and we're really going to dive into that in June. So tickets are limited for that, so get your ticket now. And in July, we'll be back at Jamestown Settlement, where we will have our Mapping the Dragon lecture. That is a group of Pamunkey and Rappahannock and other scholars who are going to talk about that time where they did sort of not retreat, but receded into the Dragon Run swamp in order to evade Bacon. So where am I? July. August, we're back here at the castle to talk about archaeology and more material culture specific to this site, because let me tell you, we got over 200 boxes of archaeology in this house from a lot of stuff, but a lot of it is from that rebellion period. That's August. In September, we're highlighting an annual program on Jamestown Island, which is the burning of Jamestown, sort of a commemoration. And
We don't actually burn it.
no.
There is fire, though.
Yeah, they're great. We don't love fire, but. And then in October, our sort of culminating event is back here at the castle for our annual 17th Century Day, where we will have reenactors, but also all of our tribal partners will be here with a presence, and it'll be more of not a lecture, but more of an event happening. So I will also say that all of these lectures are living permanently online. So you can access them, you can share them with all your friends and family. It can be found at www.baconsrebellion350.org, which perhaps is where you went to buy your ticket. So these lectures are being recorded and uploaded. If you can't come in person, you can buy a virtual ticket. And we appreciate all of your support for that. We also have, we'll be loading a bunch of resources on there. We're going to be adding teacher packets that will be free for educators to access. Lots of good stuff, I think. So with that, I will sort of wrap this up. And again, I'm sure these wonderful women up here will answer any more specific questions you might have. Visit our gift shop inside. There is a restroom inside. You can take a gander at the house. And thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.